All right, to talk about the mediator pattern, we're going to start with this little form here. Basically, you can type whatever and hit the clear button, and it'll clear it, disable the clear and the submit buttons. You can type again, hit the submit button, that'll say submitted, disable the submit button. The clear button's still enabled, but if you hit clear it, then it'll disable. And if you type anything and start deleting, it'll disable the buttons if the text field is blank. I would relate this to some sort of StarCraft reference with a UI, but it's so super simple, it's just not even worth it this time. And also, I really want to focus on the differences between the mediator pattern itself and how mediators are used in application frameworks like Pure MVC and Robot Legs, and the differences that exist in there, because I've seen projects go disastrously wrong by someone who understood the mediator pattern and then jumped into a Pure MVC project and tried to implement it when they didn't understand the differences between the two. So it's very important to be clear on the difference between the mediator pattern itself and the mediator and frameworks. So to start off, the code here is pretty simple. If you click on submit, the text changes submitted and disables the submit button. If you click on clear, then it clears the input text. And anytime the input text changes, if the text length is 0, then it disables. If it's not 0, then it enables. So basically, let's just start out by creating a mediator, which is going to be its own class here. So we'll just call this a form mediator for our form. We'll create the class, and this will just be a regular old class, and create the field for it. So we have a form mediator, which is going to be injected into the constructor here in each of our components. So in the input text field, we'll do a form mediator. It's a form mediator. And this form mediator equals form mediator. And then we'll jump over and create the form mediator field. Now basically what we're going to do here is anytime, we'll set up the event listener. Anytime it changes, we're going to bring the event into the component itself. We'll say on change, create the event handler, and we'll delegate the responsibility of handling what happens when the text input changes to the form mediator. So we'll say text input changed and create this method. So you'll see our form mediator already has one method called text input changed, which is invoked when the change event fires in the input text field. So we can basically come over here and we'll grab the text input changed code from our event handler, and then we'll go drop that in our form mediator. You'll see these errors for now with the clear button and submit button. We'll inject those guys later on. So just be a little bit patient with that. So you can see already we've deleted all the code around the text input changing within our document class here. So next let's do the clear button event. So the clear button click event, we'll pass in the form mediator. Form mediator, this dot form mediator, oops. And we will create the form mediator. And then let's say whenever you click, mouse event, click on click, then we'll delegate to the form mediator. We will say, form mediator, why don't you handle this clear button clicked event. So now our form mediator has text input changed and clear button clicked. So we'll go grab clear button clicked, drop that in our form mediator, and now we can get rid of the event handler for clear button clicked. So now we're down to submit button click. So we'll drop the form mediator into the submit button, jump into the submit button class, make sure it gets put in here, form mediator, and again, whoops. So whenever you click here, we'll do basically the same thing on click, and we'll say form mediator. This time it's submit button clicked, and hop back over to code here, jump down, grab this, and jump back over to the form mediator and paste the code in. So basically we've cleaned up everything, or all of these event handlers from our document class, and everything is communicated through the form mediator. So we actually have to, the last step here is setting up the references between the components. Input text equals input text. Let's format the imports because we don't need the events anymore. So now the form mediator has an input text field. Hop back over to the Mediator Pattern demo, and we will add form mediator clear button. It's clear button. Generate that guy as well, and hop back over again, and form mediator submit button is a submit button. Oops. All right, so our form mediator here has the input text, the clear button, it has references to all of them. It has these methods which will handle the events and do exactly what happens, exactly what you want whenever these methods are called. So you can see it's very nice and clean, a clean way to define these relationships between what happens in the UI components and how that's going to affect the other UI components. So you can see there's method text input changed, which is going to check the value. I don't need to explain this because, or explain setting the text to empty and whatever. But these methods are very clear. It's very obvious to see what's happening in this form mediator. It's just the pattern is a way of passing in this form mediator class and then just delegating the responsibility of handling those relationships into this class. Now, the arguments against this is that you're going to see these mediators in your components, like this input text field component, the clear button, the submit button. They're all going to have form mediators in them. And a lot of people would say your components should never have external code in them. You should always be able to reuse your components between any sort of applications. And anyway, that's one of the strongest arguments against this, is that it puts this form mediator dependency into the components. The arguments for it are that it gives you this very beautifully clean class to define your relationships between the UI, and makes it really easy to come in here and set up and change what happens whenever you want the events to change. It gets rid of the event listener code within your main within your container class, so your container class doesn't have to know about any of the events or anything fired off from the components. So basically, there's a lot of pros and cons, and honestly, in my opinion, I would still just stick with adding the add event listeners to these components and dealing with that in my container. But either way, you can do it whatever you want with the mediator pattern. But that is kind of the traditional defined mediator pattern is just a way of defining the relationships, communication between these different components. Now, the way that this differs from the framework mediators is what I'll show you here. I'll do the same thing. Let me refactor this back to, let me see if I can just undo all the way to where this was when we started. Undo, 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 undo. All right, so go over to the submit button and undo everything. Clear button, undo. Probably just go into my local file history and revert. But that should be done. And now we won't even need this form mediator class anymore. So we'll just delete that. And now we should be back to square one with the event listeners directly on the components in this class. Let's run it again just to double check that it still works. Still working. Yep. All right. And I guess I didn't show you that it worked when I refactored it to Mediator Patterns. It did. You'll just have to trust me on that one. Anyway, mistake on my part. So let's refactor this over to Robot Legs. Robot Legs is a very popular microarchitecture framework, whatever you want to call it, for ActionScript. And it has a prescribed model view controller service layer or way of working with your code. And it includes mediators within the framework. So first, I'll just have to set up my context class where the mediator view relationships will be defined. So let's set up a form context. We'll create this form context class. Let's see, Rolex context, and we'll generate, whoops, I don't like the underscore unless it's a getter setter. So now we have a form context, and basically in this startup method, we're going to set up our mappings between views and mediators. And I'll explain that a little bit more in just a second. But first of all, let's just kind of move all of this code into our form context. And I'll, whoops, cut and paste. Now we can, we'll just be getting rid of all the event listeners here and make sure that we set our form context view to this. And now within our form context, we can start defining each of our, let me grab these as well. And when we add these, we'll just add that to the context view. All right, so we can start defining how each of these components will map to mediators within something that's called a mediator map. So say mediator map view, input text field. We'll say input text field mediator. So we'll create this mediator class. And we can do the same thing for the others. So I just want to set these up real quick. Map view, there'll be clear button and clear button mediator. Create the clear button mediator class and meter map view, submit button mediator. Oops, mediator. All right. So now we have all these relationships defined between the, for example, this input text field and the input text field mediator. Now what's going to happen is any time that the input text field is added to our context view, basically the context view is going to be this, or our document class. So anytime it's added to that document class or any of the document class's children or anything that's set to the context view, it's going to automatically create this input text field mediator and then inject this input text field into the mediator and let you handle the communication between the input text field and the rest of the application by setting up some functionality within this onRegister method. For example, if I just go input text field, add event listener, and we'll do our event change, and say on change, then we can do, we can forward on this, this on change event to the rest of the application using something called the event dispatcher. But what I'm going to do first is set up the logic, or grab the logic from this. So we'll grab the event handler from our original class, and we'll drop that in the event, the input text field mediator. Now, what you don't want to see in a mediator is a reference to components that are, that aren't part of this mediator, because we're going to send these events off into the application and let the application forward on those events to be handled in other mediators. Let's rename this. This needs to be input text field. So instead of clear button and submit button disabled, we're actually going to create a custom event. So we'll say event dispatcher, dispatch event. We'll create a form event class. And that will be an event. So we have a form event, which will be of the type form event. Let's see. So if the text is 0, then it'll be form event. Let's call this text blank. Sounds good enough to me. So text blank. All right. So if it's 0, then we'll send out a text blank event. If it's not 0, then we'll set out a text ready. Why not? Okay, and we'll call this one text. Turn off caps lock. Text ready. So basically, whenever the text changes, it's going to forward on these events through the event dispatcher and let the application handle them. But another thing we need to take into account is when it receives events from the application through our event dispatcher, we can receive a something like a form event clear. And we'll just say clear. So whenever it receives the clear event from the application, we'll do just an on clear and say input text field text is cleared. Or we'll just duplicate this line, form event on submit. Let's see, submit. I'll say on submit. So whenever you submit, we'll say input text field text is submitted. And you might want to make that like a property of the event that comes along. And anyway, I'm not going to worry too much about how the text gets set, but you would generally have that text value as something that is carried along with the event object. So we have our input text field mediator pretty much complete now. So it handles what happens when you click, and it also handles other application events that will come in and affect the text field. Now, the important thing to notice here is that the mediator does not get put into your input text field. Your input text field is still pure and clean from the rest of your application. It doesn't have any mediator references within it. So you don't have to worry about the reusability of this component, because you can take it out and reuse it anywhere in another application without having to worry about deleting the mediator that you would have to create with a mediator pattern. So let's complete this just for the sake of completeness. If you don't want to see the rest of it, I'm just going to type out, for completeness sake, of showing off robot legs, how the rest of it would look. So if I jump back over to our form context and go into the clear button mediator, I'll just say clear button, add event listener, mouse event click, on click. We'll say event handler, event dispatcher, dispatch event, new form event, and this will be the form event clear. And then also the other case was if the application says that the form event text is blank, then on text blank, then the clear button should disable. And on the flip side of that, if the text is ready, then the clear button should enable. So this clear button mediator is ready. If you click on it, it's going to dispatch the event off the application and say clear the form. When it says the text is ready, it'll enable it. If the text is blank, it'll disable it. So let's hop over to the submit button mediator. Submit button mediator, and do pretty much the same thing here. So submit button, add event listener, whoops, mouse event click, on click. So when you click the submit event, we're going to say event dispatcher, dispatch event, form event submit. So that'll fire that off into the application. And if you remember, in the input text field mediator, it'll receive that and change that to submitted. Oh, and also the submit button will disable when it's clicked, when it clicks itself. And also event dispatcher, we'll listen to the text events for text blank and text ready. So on text blank, I'll say submit button disable, and on text ready, say submit button enable. Now, just like magic, I know that was kind of quite a bit of code. Oops, I should have copy and pasted those from here, but a little bit too late now. All right. So here we are, all completed and ready to test it out. We'll kind of run it, cross your fingers, and you'll see that everything works. Clear this to submit, and if you delete everything, it will disable both of the buttons. So this is the mediators in your framework. These are going to be classes that whenever these are your components are created, it's going to create an instance of the input text field mediator. The input text field mediator is going to know about your input text field, add listeners to it, and also listen to events from your application on how to set up the communication between the different components. So just to recap, the mediator pattern traditionally is more about creating a mediator class, a single mediator class that will go inside of each of your components and handle the relationships and the events that happen between them, whereas mediators and frameworks is more of a one mediator per component that kind of wraps around the class and adds event listeners and application events and listens and dispatches events throughout the application to set up those relationships. So I hope that's been helpful. I know this has been pretty long, but it's really important to be clear on the difference between these two, especially if you know the mediator pattern from your past history and you're trying to jump into these mediator projects. Robot Legs is really nice because it automatically creates the mediators for you whenever your context, whenever the on-added to stage event is fired by adding one of its components to the stage. In pure MVC, it gets pretty rough because you create your mediators yourself, and the absolute worst thing you can do is create those mediators and then try and pass them into your views, and then you have these this big mess of code that gets insanely hard to refactor, especially because those are going to be referenced throughout the application through the application facade. Anyway, I could rant for about that on that topic for a while because it's kind of bit me before, but I'll just think I'll end right now.